Hello. Today, I'm going to be talking about a game with a bit of a varied history. I don't think I've ever seen a game go back and forth from "it's so over" to "we're so back" in such short spans of time. And yet through it all, it trudges on through a pile of technical issues. Helldivers is a 4-player co-op top-down shooter released in 2015 by Arrowhead Game Studios. About 9 years later, they moved down the camera a bit and released it as a sequel. Helldivers 2 was the entry to truly break into the mainstream. This game was the shit on its release, so much so that the prevailing technical issue it had at that point was running out of server capacity. A lot has happened since then, which I'm sure you're at least familiar with if you're watching this. Through all of it though, there wasn't really a point where I truly disliked playing the game. As it is now, it's one of my favorite horde shooters, which in turn is one of my favorite genres. I think it's something special, and brings out a special part in all of us.
Hey guys, let's play Guess the Stratagem in my hand. You dumb!
This will be an overview of the Super Earth Armed Forces experience, with a few looks at how its predecessor handled things. In the grim darkness of the 23rd century, there is only war. Somewhere out there in the galaxy, a faction of dissidents has very rapidly become disgusted by the weakness of their flesh. The intelligent race of alien squids that invaded a century ago have seemingly vanished. We're farming giant bugs for oil, but have lost track of some of the livestock. This is the stage on which Helldivers 2 is set, where humanity is doomed to fight in the Second Galactic War as long as the game's servers stay up. Now, like before, it's up to the Helldivers to spread and maintain managed democracy throughout the galaxy. Our training is measured in hours and our life expectancy in minutes. Scores of frozen soldiers are transported on countless super destroyers to be deployed into missions as needed. Each player even gets to name their own, using a set of democratic keywords, of course. Explorable hubs aren't a new concept by any means, especially in co-op games. There's an extra layer of immersion to be had by actually walking around your home base, rather than just having a menu with 4 guys standing in a row. The gimmick of the one in this game is that by upgrading the ship, the environment around you will visibly change to reflect those upgrades. At the front of the ship is the bridge, featuring our mission selection screen, the galactic map. I love what they did with this area. It does such a good job at emphasizing the scale of the conflict. Being able to see the entire galaxy mapped with supply lines and key objectives, and seeing the destroyers of other players outside the windows really gives you a sense that you're participating in something much bigger than yourself, which is a core part of the game's identity. The entire thing feels a lot more sleek than the rougher, blockier interior of the first game's hub. Everything from the UI to the physical environment reflects the advancements that Super Earth has made since the first war. Look at how you actually had to climb in and out of the old Hell pods, but the newer ones lower and raise their passengers automatically. Or how Helldiver recruitment has finally expanded outside the territory of former Britain. Speaking of Britain, it's time to talk about the tools with which we enact our colonization. Helldivers have 2 main sets of tools: equipment, which is what you spawn with, and stratagems, which are various airstrikes, tools, and emplacements shot from the super destroyer above you. Equipment is comprised of a primary, a secondary, a grenade, armor, and a perk that affects your entire team. Shooting is pretty simple. You point, wait for the crosshairs to align, and fire. Some will turn slower as you look around, and reloading deletes all of the ammo you still had in the mag. Weapons also have alternate modes, changing things like whether or not the weapon is automatic, the zoom of the scope, and whether or not you have the ability to blow yourself up by holding the left mouse button for too long. Primary weapons consist of what you would expect: ARs, shotguns, rifles, SMGs, energy weapons, as well as a few more exotic options. You'll be more limited in your selection of secondaries. It's also about what you would expect with a few unconventional options, like the primaries. Funny enough though, this is still way more than what the first game had, with a grand total of 4 secondaries. And not only that, but equipping any of the non-default ones also took up your perk slot. Grenades. I only use like 3 of these. Impacts are pretty versatile. They clear out small groups just fine, but can also take out armored medium enemies in a pinch. Stuns can freeze enemies long enough for you to toss an orbital strike on top of them or something. Thermites received the biggest glow up of their lives after a certain patch, and are now an incredibly reliable anti-tank option. Just toss one or two of them, and you can take out almost anything in the game. I'll talk about boosters and armor later. Stratagems come in these ball-shaped beacons that call in various things from your Super Destroyer. It's kinda like Pokemon, but instead of the ball releasing an animal, it releases a war crime instead.
Calling in orbital strike!
Which stratagem you use depends on its input sequence, calling back to one of the core cultural pillars of Super Earth, Osumania. As their name suggests, stratagems make up the more strategic side of the gameplay. They're kind of what set Helldivers apart from other shooters. It takes your comparatively weak and small group of players and empowers them in a way that lets them deal with larger hordes or heavies in a way that makes more sense in universe. There's a pretty healthy selection, even though I only take the same 2 on every mission. Orbital strikes and barrages fire a single or multiple shots from the destroyer, be it a single shell or a big laser. Eagle stratagems use an aircraft to deploy a variety of ordnance like a strafing run with machine guns or the infamous 500 kilogram bomb. Similar use cases to orbital strikes, but they have much shorter cooldowns in exchange for having limited uses before having to recharge. Turrets are mainly used for holding positions. Mechs... Backpacks have their own dedicated slot and provide varying utilities. Favorite of mine is the supply pack. It's an entire resupply drop that you carry on your back, and you can actually distribute the boxes to your teammates to give them a much needed boost in ammo or stims. Lastly, support weapons. They take up your 3rd weapon slot and are pretty important, as some are the most consistent way to deal with heavy enemies. They're also generally more powerful than what you bring with you, but are sometimes hindered in some other way. Some require you to stay completely still to reload them, or take up the backpack slot to carry additional ammo. Then there's things like the grenade launcher and stalwart. They excel in doing what your equipment usually does, which is clearing smaller enemies, but as a trade-off they also lack some of the limitations that other support weapons do. Overall, I like the system. In the absence of weapon upgrades, it offers an alternate way to specialize your build towards what you want it to do, which adds some much needed diversity. The Helldivers 2 mission start screen is iconic. It's pretty funny that one of the more memorable parts of the game is the loading screen. It's scored by A Cup of Liber-tea, the game's main theme. The start of the song is cool and all, but it's a shame that no one in game will ever hear my favorite part, which is that one section in the second half where they call back to the Helldivers 1 theme. On a galaxy-wide campaign, we'll naturally be seeing a variety of planets. On each map, each one has a liberation rating, showing how much Super Earth has taken over the area. Conversely, each planet also has a decay rate, the percentage per hour that the enemy takes back. Does the game show what this rate is?
Yes.
The planets themselves are pretty neat though.
Frieza is my inspiration to be racist.
You have a nice spread of biomes, and for a game that mostly takes place on flat ground, the landscapes can be very pretty. Different planets means different terrain. Sometimes a planet decides to behave and you get a nice open map with minimal obstructions. On the other hand, you have swamp planets, where the trees are legally allowed to block your airstrikes. Sure, it's annoying, but I like being forced to adapt sometimes. Planets also come with their own modifiers and environmental effects, special conditions that can affect various aspects of the gameplay. like blizzards, meteor showers, ion storms that disable all of your stratagems along with your map, permanent obstruction of the map, increases to stratagem call-in time, all vary up the gameplay depending on whatever planet High Command sends you to, or whichever one you just feel like going to. I don't really care. It's more often about adapting in your actual execution instead of the loadout you bring.
What
Like
the
a
fuck
beginning,
is
I'm
wrong
sorry
with
to
you?
hear that.
In the first game, there were really just 3 mission types: the normal kind, kill missions, and boss fights. The normal ones kinda just had random objectives scattered across the map, and in the sequel, this has been expanded upon. There are still random objectives scattered across the map. Now they serve a secondary role to main objectives, which also determine the mission type. I like how the primary and secondary objectives work in tandem to make up the overall mission flow. Primaries are a constant presence, always visible on the map. If you're not speedrunning or rushing them first, they're more of a long-term goal. Secondary objectives are hidden on the bridge map, but they appear on your personal one when you get close by. And you can also sometimes see them from afar. You'll also be seeing enemy outposts of various sizes around, visible as red spots of enemy activity on the map. Taking them out invites a higher risk of prolonged combat, so they might require some planning. I think it's important for co-op shooters to strike a balance between things you're able to plan for and things you have to adapt to on the fly, and I think this game does that pretty well. If your game hasn't been playing for a really long time, the side objectives add some much needed unpredictability to the mix. Although they could really use some new ones, the current ones are getting a little stale. Either you get in and out without any losses, or you walk out missing 3/4 of the body budget. Bad teammates are the spice of life. The justification, I give myself. Points of interest come in a bunch of different variations and contain nearly every currency in the game. Chief among them are the coveted super credits, otherwise only obtainable with real non-super currency. Even though I'm not really losing anything when opening them, they still ignite that primal high that you get from gambling. Getting a triple drop of super credits delivers plenty of dopamine to my brain.
Triple super credits! Oh my god, no.
Conversely, getting a triple drop of support weapons makes me want to turn one of them on myself. Enemies. There are enemies in the co-op shooter, and all of them come in 2 distinct factions, starting with You're not going to make a Starship Troopers inspired setting and not have alien bugs. Terminids, or bugs, are the first enemy faction you'll go up against. Basic in behavior, high in numbers. Most of them actually need to get up close to kill you, making them pretty kiteable. This also means that the most dangerous among them have ways to overcome that gap. Terminids are the descendants of the first game's bugs. Back then they acted about the same, though missing some enemies. Their infantry units have the ability to call bug breaches, calling upon the local tunnel dwellers to surface at their position. Truly, the most terrifying feature of the bugs is how weirdly quiet their heavies are.
He doesn't know.
Chargers come in 3 flavors. They all have heavy armor on their front, but have a conveniently unarmored Bugacy in their rear that you can shoot with small arms. Normal chargers will run at you, and that's about it. Behemoths will also do that, but unfortunately they had to cut the budget to make the 3rd charger variant, leaving behemoths with less armor coverage than their prequel counterparts. 4 chargers project a massive fart cloud wherever they move, meaning that while you'll know when one's in the area, you won't necessarily know where it is until it comes at you. Either way, even with their asses out, most prefer to just use anti-tank weapons on their face instead.
What the fuck?
Impalers were a complete menace on their release. Insta-kills launching you into the stratosphere, invisible explosions on their attacks that ragdolled you. They do retain some of these traits today, but they've mellowed out since their release. Right now they're pretty much just another heavy, though I do think they could stand to be a little stronger nowadays. Bile Titans are the tallest among the bugs. They spit acid that can kill you near instantly and have the funny ragdoll when they die. Then there are the less heavy enemies. Brood Commanders spawn other bugs and run around with their heads off. Stalkers spawn from their own side objective. They can tongue you so hard it sends you flying into a rock and breaks your skull. Hunters spawn in groups, jump at you, and slow you down on hit. Probably the one I've taken the most deaths to, is what I would have said if they didn't nerf them in an update a bit ago. And most importantly, you must remember that where there's bugs, there's a random with an orbital napalm barrage ready to incinerate the entire team because he saw a scavenger 5 meters away. Overall, bugs are pretty straightforward, and satisfying to kill too. Seriously, they did a great job with the bug damage feedback, even if there is a bit of jank in the mix. They're the more popular faction for a reason. Although right now I'm wondering if they have any new lore planned for them at all, or if what you see is really what you get. Some time ago, the bugs covered part of their territory with this giant cloud called the Gloom, and it hasn't really been doing anything for a pretty long time. Automatons, or bots, are the second and only other faction in the game. They're the descendants of the cyborgs from the First War, after they discovered the remainder of the copper wire that lay under their skin. As is very apparent from the background footage, these guys shoot back. Their tactics are a good amount more advanced too. Bot outposts aren't just random holes in the ground, they actually have walls, machine gun nests, mines, and cannons. Not to mention the modified ones that act as side objectives. If a detector tower sees you, it immediately calls dropships on your location. Stratagem jammers block all stratagem usage in the vicinity, including reinforcements. The bots also have a flying enemy, same as the bugs. On that front, they came from nests that are visible from afar and destructible with the right weapons, stratagems, or hell bombs. Bot gunship facilities don't really care what stratagems you have. Unless you have a mini nuke shell handy, you're gonna have to get your ass over there and call in a hell bomb. Because of these features, raiding a bot facility can be a bit more tactical. The required tactics being throwing a stratagem ball without stepping on a mine. As usual, you gotta watch out for the smallest enemies. Troopers come in several delicious flavors, including rocket launcher. All of them can call in dropships on you, but the commissars will do it first. It's nice that they expanded on the troopers so much and gave them the ability to fire flares. In the first game, only the commissar equivalents were able to do that, leaving the basic troopers with not much to do but shoot their little gun at you. Heavy and rocket devastators are pressure units and make up the bulk of the force. They fire a lot of projectiles. Some of them might hit you. This is bad. All of them have this tiny little head that can be popped with light AP weapons. And all of them have variant specific weak points. Hulks follow this same design philosophy and are the most common heavies.
Why are there 4 Hulks at one fucking point of
This is
interest?
the mega base.
Tanks technically have non-anti-tank gameplay, but no one uses it. Factory Striders are walking masses of armor and guns, periodically giving birth to a bunch of devastators. Standing in front of them is generally unadvised. They also have the most schizophrenic ragdolls in the entire game. Bots are generally a far more dynamic opponent. They're big on destructible parts, heavy armor, and forcing the use of cover. The projectiles, the dropships flying overhead, the explosions, even the distorted chatter they emit make for some of the game's most cinematic moments. The atmosphere is genuinely pretty great. At the current stage of the game, they're definitely the harder opponents. They have plenty of ways to obliterate you instantly from range, but you can kill them just as fast with the right equipment. However, the most infamous thing about fighting bots is their inclination for the ragdoll. It's widely known that bugs aren't as popular to fight as bugs, and there's a few reasons for that, like how you can generally be killed faster from further away. But the biggest part is arguably the ragdolls. Bots means more explosions, and that means more chances that you'll be sent flying and shatter your cranium on the nearest rock. Rocket devastators used to do this a lot, but they got nerfed into the ground and they don't really do it as much anymore. The biggest culprit of this today is the reinforced rocket strider. There's also the matter of armor penetration. It's more practical to fight bots with a medium pen primary, due to how much of it there is on that front, though high accuracy light pen weapons can perform there too. It's generally more limiting than bugs, where things like light pen and fire weapons are more practical to use. Lastly, I want to take a moment to commend the damage feedback again. I think it's generally harder to do for robots compared to living things, but they handled it pretty well here. Troopers will just ragdoll when they die. Popping devs in the head makes them spew fire, and killing any heavy makes them explode. It's a nice way of making it more satisfying while giving a clear indicator for when a strong enemy is taken out. An exception to this is, of course, the rocket strider. Let's break the pace entirely for a moment and talk about music. I think you can tell that I didn't really know where to fit this section. The enemy themes in HD1 and HD2 take pretty different directions. This is the Cyborgs Combat theme in HD1. And this is the Automatons combat theme in HD2. Notice the difference? The first game's music is triumphant, dramatic, but more importantly, it sounds like it's on your side, completely aligning with Super Earth's righteous conquest of the galaxy. Meanwhile, in HD2, the music is kinda just going, "You're fucked." It reflects the new organized nature of the Automatons, that you're on their home turf, and maybe things won't be okay after all. My personal game theory is that this direction came from the fact that third person is naturally a more boots on the ground perspective than top down, causing the music to reflect the reality of the conflict a little more. The music for the bugs follows the same trend, though I prefer the first game's music way more in this front. The heavy percussion really sets them apart from other factions. The big musical payoff of any HD2 mission, however, is when you activate Extraction, and No Diver Left Behind starts playing. Unlike the other combat themes in this game, this one is undoubtedly yours, and why wouldn't it be? You've already won at this point. Even if everyone dies here, the mission is still complete. You've served your purpose, and in the end, that's really the only thing that matters. You do really want to get out alive though, those samples won't extract themselves. Helldivers 2 is not a perfect game. Hot take, I know, but I want to look at some areas that have some potential to be expanded. First off, didn't talk about boosters and armor in the earlier section, mostly because I wanted to tackle them here instead. Currently, they're not really well balanced. These three are basically no-brain picks for every mission, while the rest range from not bad to pretty useless. I don't really know what I would do with the stat boosters, but I think at least raising the starting stim count to 3 would make HSO less ubiquitous in pubs. I have less of an issue with armor balance, but I think it would be better if the damage type resistance armors lean harder into their respective playstyles. Like, for example, arc armor also letting arc equipment chain to +1 target every 3 shots or some shit like that. Just something else on top of the damage res would make them infinitely more interesting. Also, give us equipment loadouts. This is a basic feature, why the fuck don't we have them? I don't have a problem with war bonds existing. It's honestly kind of a miracle that we can get these for free in this day and age. What I do have a problem with is that recent war bonds have been less valuable with the introduction of vehicle skins. The original premium warbond structure contains 3 primaries, 1 secondary, 1 throwable, and 3 armor sets. Starting with Viper Commandos, vehicle skins started being included, taking away from what was there before. That warbond lost an armor set and 2 primaries, for example. I don't think that these skins make up the value of the items they pushed out, and they're still being sold for the same amount of SC. I get not wanting to bloat the weapon pool, but I still think that gameplay options should be what premium bonds offer first and foremost. I don't mind stratagems being in chemical agents, for example. I have no idea why Arrowhead made it like this, but at a certain point across the 3 sample tiers, you will have way less rare samples than the other 2 types. It's not uncommon to be capped on common and super samples, but missing some from the middle tier. I think the costs for ship upgrades should be reworked so that rares aren't the only thing in critical shortage. It would also be nice if the resource caps were lifted, but at least show us what the caps are in game. I don't know why they only did this for metals, it makes no fucking sense. I think that after all the weapon buffs, some of the heavies, among other things, could use some of their own. Impalers, with their most annoying traits removed, are now pretty easy to deal with and avoid. I wouldn't mind a small buff to their accuracy, or if they got their sweep attack back in some form. I think Factory Striders not having different weapons that they can appear with is a weird missed opportunity considering that's how Hulks work. Imagine one with a mortar instead of a laser cannon, or grenade launchers instead of machine guns. Obviously that's not all the flaws with the enemies in this game, but those are just the 3 I came up with on the top of my head. I really want a way to at least make my helmet and armor the same color scheme. To preserve the game's aesthetic, they could give us a selection of colors instead of the full wheel. Maybe they could even be purchasable with, requisition slips, since you're usually capped on those even long before you get all the ship upgrades. I've accepted that most games will not have custom decals like Armored Core 6, and no matter how much I want to, I'll never be able to put a womb tattoo on my Helldiver. But please, Arrowhead, at least let me change the colors. It's not often that I look at a game and think I really have no idea where this is going. Arrowhead's track record with this game is a little spotty, to say the least. As I was making this, the DSS storyline has come and gone, and it turned out to be pretty disappointing with how much time it took. When it was actually available to use, it immediately jibbed entire teams with its orbital barrages, followed by an Eagle Storm that actually worked. Overall though, it kinda showed off the stagnant nature of the Galactic War, and how nothing of significance has really happened for a while. And this might be a bit of a hot take, but I worry about the devs overcorrecting with the buffs. After Escalation of Freedom, the idea of nerfs kinda became persona non grata in the community, but obviously just buffing is also unhealthy, and I worry that they might swing too far in that direction. I am in favor of nerfing the crossbow without any significant buff to the Eruptor, for example. It was bad nerfs that got the players into that mindset, but Arrowhead shouldn't be afraid to push good ones because of that. Now more than ever, I think the best way to increase difficulty going forward is by introducing new enemies and more complex mission types. The major balance patches have pretty much wrapped up, so they can focus on content now. Helldivers 2 is still a very flawed game. The problems I brought up aren't even close to everything the game has wrong with it, but I'm still having a lot of fun, especially with friends. As a player, there comes a point where the jank becomes part of the charm. But it's also completely possible that many of the grander ideas that the devs have for the game are held back by the game engine, time constraints, or just straight up bad decision making. Who knows if we'll ever see missions with more than 4 people, or vehicles, or the return of boss fights. Still, none of this changes the uniqueness of the game they've created, and the fun I've had with my friends playing it. I hope that someday we'll have some other event that's remembered as much as Malevelon Creek is, but my expectations aren't exactly high there. That's a lot of rambling to essentially say that I hope for this game's success in the future, though not everything I want will be added, obviously. Thank you, Arrowhead, for making this game that I enjoy playing, and thank you for watching.